Hello, Bernhard.
Hi, Carsten.
Today it's planning and designing. So we start our in-depth part of the video series, right?
Correct. There are some slides that we maybe need to talk about because these questions come up very frequently, I would say, right? So there are some design considerations or fault tolerance considerations, right? So the people are most of the time asking, okay, what do I need to do in order to provide resiliency for certain types of failures? And they're also looking at the budget, right? So how much hardware would that mean?
Mm-hmm.
So we talk a little bit about the options, how you could install the cluster and what AVD brings for you or HCI. And then after we have sort of decided for a scenario that we want to put up, it's calculation time, right? So at least we want to share what is available and do a cost calculation or an estimation maybe, sort
An
of, right?
estimation, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now let's kick it off. So this picture
Yeah.
you see on the right hand side here is, it is close to the place where I live, and we had a flooding recently. So that are these on-premises risks that you have and that you need
Yeah.
to prepare, right?
Yeah.
So
Wait.
that's not a,
I didn't first see it correctly. I was thinking this is a street between the houses and the water, but this is the Donau, right? The river Donau, right?
yes, this is a river Danube and the Regensburg, and this is not a data center you see on the right hand side with the sand sacks. This is a sausage factory, sort of, right? But also a very important location, to be honest, right? And then you need to secure it.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I mean, it's just an example for a royalty-free picture that I took for simulating some risks that you have.
Yeah.
But you also have hybrid risks, right? So we talked about Azure Virtual Desktop is a hybrid service, and you have dependencies to the cloud. For example, you need Entra ID and you need the AVD brokers kind of stuff, right? So the web
Mm-hmm.
or the services that Microsoft hosts in order to reach to the desktops. And they either do have SLAs or they don't have SLAs, right? So regarding the broker or the virtual desktop services, as of now, um, as far as I know, or at least as it is officially documented, we are trying to achieve a 99.9% availability for these URLs, right? So you need to think about it or at least be aware of it.
Yeah.
For
And
the
we also use internet,
right,
of course. So internet is also not always available. So
right.
there could be some problems there,
Right.
right?
Right.
Okay.
And talking a little bit about, and there are some additional things like Azure Virtual Desktop itself and the way how you use it may provide already some, or at least directs sort of the way of resiliency you need to think about, because you have two options like personal desktops. That means I, Bernhard Frank, always get the same desktop. I may share my profile data on probably on this box. I may install software, right? So it's a unique machine. And I want to secure that for business continuity, for example. So if one data center goes down, what can I do in order to have the same desktop on a different location, right?
Hmm.
So I need to take everything. Whereas on the other hand, a lot of people do a pooled desktop, which is like a bunch of desktops that can be shared amongst the users. So I may log on to the first desktop today, but the load balancer may decide to put me to the next one or to the other desktop the next day, right? For round robin purposes. So most of the
Yeah.
times in these kind of scenarios, my user data, my local data, my profile data is stored on a central file share, right? And I may need to secure not the desktops themselves because they look all the same and I can spin them up somewhere else, but I need to provide the profile data at the alternative
Mm.
location. So that's a different
So
way of thinking. Yeah,
yeah, with the first one, the personal desktop, you have to think about a backup strategy, right? You have
yeah,
to save this data in the machine
right.
for you, and with the shared desktops, there is a little bit redundancy built in,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
if one doesn't work, or if a cluster has a problem,
Yeah,
maybe we can use another one, because our
right.
data are hopefully high available
Yeah.
in these shares, right? Okay.
Yeah. So, and maybe you have a mixture of both. So you need to have maybe two or align two BCDR strategies, right? Depending on the importance of the desktops that you're hosting, right?
Mhm.
So maybe let's talk a little bit about the deployment methods that you have with Azure Stack HCI, right? And
Because
what
it's the
fault tolerance?
underlying
Yeah.
infrastructure, and
Yeah.
we can
Yeah.
have redundancies there.
Mhm.
That we talk about that here, and then we have a redundancy in AVD
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I mean the most simplistic deployment sort of is the single node deployment, right? It doesn't give a lot of fault tolerance, for an AVD form. You only have tolerates disk failures, right? But
Yeah.
it's also the cheapest one, right? So, but that may work for very small environments.
Yeah, but wait. Let me
Mhm.
let
Yeah.
me add something here. I've seen customers who have standalone, for example, Citrix
Mhm.
boxes, but plenty of them. So
Mhm.
they have redundancy because they have not one box, maybe 10
Right. Right.
single node boxes, and there is redundancy in that also, because we have our
Right.
load balancer that is directing where we go, at least with a pooled environment. With a dedicated,
Cor-
of course,
correct.
yeah. So it's
Correct.
not a bad choice. You can do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
that's a good point. So for single or personal desktops on these nodes, right? I mean, you're secure for disk failures, but if the system goes down, your desktop is gone, right?
yeah,
Um, for pooled resources, I mean, if you have multiple of these single nodes, right, then you can spin up some resiliency, because the load balancer, as you said, would be sort of figuring out, which desktop is running.
yeah, we
And
will look into that, because we
right,
think it will do, but we are not
yeah,
so sure yet, right? So let's see.
yeah, yeah. No, I'm pretty sure that the load balancer will pick it up, right? There
Okay,
might be
cool.
a timeout stuff, right, or a glitch before it will detect that, but there is some sort of hot beating going on.
Yeah.
Okay, so most of the time, I think, or a much more common scenario is the cluster deployment, consisting of two or more nodes,
Hmm.
right? Where you have the tolerance of the HCI system for node failures, right? It depends on, if you take a two-node cluster, well, then obviously you are prepared for a node failure. And maybe if take into account storage space is direct, you could do a four-way, or do four copies of the data, and would sort of also get resiliency of another disk failure if you really wish.
Hmm. With two nodes, yeah. And
Yeah,
you called it single site cluster. So
right.
it's in one location, in one rack. We
Hmm.
will talk about multi-sites a bit later. Yeah, but it's important.
Right.
It's one cluster. Yeah. Okay, in one
Right.
site.
So if that would be, hosted in your sausage factory on the picture that you've seen before, you may
Yeah.
have a problem, right?
Yeah.
You may need to do a backup and port it to somewhere else so that you can continue work after the flooding, but maybe not at this time, right? So you may want to have alternatives. So often discussed is the sort of split rack cluster or campus cluster, or there's a couple of names for that, but the idea is relatively clear. So so split the cluster across two racks, or even a little bit longer,
Two rooms.
across rooms, right? So the
Yeah.
people here in Germany are maybe a little bit afraid of fire, right?
It's
And
burning all the time. It's so dry here.
yeah, so that's, I think it's sort of dictated in one of the best practices guidances, right, for running
Yeah,
data centers somewhere. So a lot of people are looking into provide that functionality. um,
that's true.
and there is a big debate about it. Is it supported or is it not supported by Microsoft? So I think Don't
my
lose the
camera. I
camera.
was playing with my camera. So
Okay.
let me talk about that. So
Yeah.
in my understanding, in
Hmm.
the moment, it's not supported any storage basis direct design. So people are asking, so how long could be the network
The
connections be? They
cables. Yeah.
want to stretch it, but
Right.
when they ask about how long could the network connection be, they
Mm.
intend to put it in two different racks in different rooms.
Right.
And the technology, if we just take a single cluster and put it in two different rooms, the technology is not aware of that.
Hmm.
So you can have failures and you're not, it works pretty well.
Hmm.
So I built plenty of them, maybe
Hmm.
hundreds already,
Hmm. Hmm.
because in Germany we want to do that. It's by nature to spread the workload over different
Hmm.
rooms, but there is, I would say, it's not supported. There is
Right.
something in Azure Stack HCI, at least it was until
Mm.
23H2. We talk about that later. That is supported, but in the moment, we are a little bit here in the unclear. Maybe something is coming, maybe not. We will see.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe I should have, it's a gray area, to be honest. I mean,
yeah,
because you could interpret the official Microsoft documentation in either way, sort of, right?
yeah,
Usually we only document what is allowed, right? We are not so good at documenting explicitly what is not allowed. But there are some things, there is a big debate on this going on,
yeah.
to be honest. So be aware that it, it looks good in reality, so it's working relatively good, or let's say,
It
it has
works
been
perfect.
it has been deployed many times at different customers which are happy with it. However, the support statement is a little bit unclear. The software
Yeah,
wouldn't
and
prevent you from setting this up,
yeah.
but you're sort of a little bit at a risk here,
Yeah, and
maybe.
there are risks involved, and you have to know
Yeah.
them and
Right.
uh, work accordingly. For example, if you have a
Yeah.
four-node cluster, put two
Mm.
nodes in each side, and you decide to do a two-way mirror.
Hmm. Yeah.
If one side fails, I'm pretty sure all your data is gone. So
Right.
you have to understand the
Yeah.
scenario and set it up correctly. Yeah,
Yeah, it's not something for the newbies, to be honest, right? I mean, if you do that kind of speciality, you should be knowing what you're doing. However,
yeah,
you see, we are very passionate about that scenario. However, you need to know the circumstances around it, and there is a debate going on. So things regarding the split rack cluster may change in the future. May,
yeah,
I don't know,
yeah,
but um, Microsoft is at least, sort of debating internally, and let's see how that goes. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Next thing, what the people would be looking like is a what I call a multi-site cluster or a stretch cluster,
Mhm,
right? Which is the more like the official documentation. So if you look up Azure Stack HCI, and you may come across that kind of scenario where you have two sites that are all part for, it could be quite some kilometers. It could be different cities, for example, right? And we stretch the cluster between one side to the other. So there is a high-speed network between those two. However, it's seen as a single cluster that is site-aware, right?
mhm,
Storage is replicated using storage replica. However, the big caveat to this is it's currently not supported in 23H2,
mhm.
right? So,
Let me put a little bit of an advertisement here. We
mhm,
both did a series about a stretch
right.
cluster with 22H2. It was supported in 20H2 up till 22H2.
Hmm.
In the moment, we can't build it in
Hmm.
23H2, but I'm pretty sure it will come again. But
Right.
be aware, in the moment, we don't have it. But we
As of
did, I
now,
think, a
yeah,
6 hour or a
yeah,
series about how to set up a multi-site cluster correctly. Yeah, and
yeah,
it's a lot of networking and routing involved if you really do it like Microsoft
yeah.
wants to do it. It's not
Okay.
the cluster you talked about, the split rack cluster or the campus cluster.
Mm,
That's much easier, but it's not
right.
supported.
Right.
Okay,
So,
but we have other
okay.
choices, right?
Right. I mean, you should be aware of that, right? So the other choice I would say, and I think it is not so bad. I mean, you do have the multi-sites clusters, right? So what there is nothing that would prevent you from creating multiple clusters in different sites, which are individual clusters, right? So
Yeah.
I'm talking about cluster A and cluster B, right? And you
And
could
no
use
stretching involved. Cluster
no,
A is only in one rack, and cluster B is
right.
in another side in another rack, and you can
Right.
have multiple of those. Yeah.
And now the idea is to, I mean, if you have the different locations or the different sites, you would, create, you could, for example, create individual host pools with virtual machines or with desktops on each cluster, right? um, and have it in a sort of active passive mode, if you will, right? So the VMs maybe on the other side are shut down for saving costs, whereas you have a main site running the stuff. And in terms, if there is any failure, right, you just boot the others up, and then your folks can connect to the other side, because for Azure it's irrelevant really where this Azure Stack HCI cluster is, right? As long as the desktops are there and reporting back that they can take sessions, all good. The only difficulty here is if you need to have data that is traveling or that needs to travel with the user, and I'm talking about profile data, right? So that's the delicacy or the delicate piece of this kind of setup, where you need to have some sort of replication of the profiles from one side to the other, right?
Yeah, but there's a solution for that, even a nice one, and we will maybe talk
Yeah.
about that too, right?
Yeah, so we will dedicate time on this, to be honest, because it's a question that comes up quite in a while. Yeah, let's. I'm also excited on how we really will shape that video, but be promised we'll deliver on this. Okay, there are other things possible, like the hybrid setup, right? So it is not a do this or that. You can combine it, right? So if you don't have multiple sites, you can always rely on Azure as your second site, for example, all right, or your primary site, and take Azure Stack HCI this as present, as another presence.
Yeah.
However, I mean, and the setup is really like, you do AVD native on Azure, and you then do also AVD on HCI. The management plane is the same, it's in Azure. And if there is an outage of your location, you still have the Azure data center to rely on, and where you can spin up your desktops. However, same things apply. If you want if you want to have profile data to be available and synced across, that's the difficulty here, right?
Yeah.
And that's a little bit more difficult because you have a switch of technologies, right? Whereas the scale-out file server, for example, can do the job for replicating content in cluster A and B, and the previous scenario, this would not be possible or would not
Mm.
work as good in Azure, for example, right?
Mm.
But
And maybe we would have a stretch scenario, so our VMs
right,
would either connect from on-prem to the
mm,
workloads in Azure, or from Azure to the workloads on-prem. So
yeah,
also networking is very important here. Maybe you have latency
mm,
issues there.
right,
So you have to think about it if it's a valid choice for you for your
yeah.
workload. Yeah,
And
but
there's
it's
always,
possible.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, think out of the ordinary, right? I mean, if you are doing pooled desktops, right? So the profile data will cause you, it will cause you a lot of headaches, right? But there are also always alternative file sharing mechanisms available. And even in an
Yeah.
enterprise, you may already have OneDrive for Business, for example, which you need to educate your users. Hey, if you want to have your data to travel with you, then take the OneDrive for Business, for example, right?
Yeah.
And then you don't have, then OneDrive for Business is taking care of this, and not you need to do it. So I would rather go with this way because it's much easier to set up and causes less friction because you don't have to care about the replication of the profiles. So. But anyways, I mean, you see the complexity in that kind of setup. But that shouldn't prevent us from going ahead. But at least that's some planning. And which is the scenario that we are going to do? We are, I think, in that video series, we do the multiple sites clusters, right?
Yeah, we have two
Right.
node clusters.
Right.
We will set up the second one with much more details in the
Right.
future videos. So then we have two of those, and we can play the multi-site
Okay.
clusters scenario, how you called
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah.
in each side, one cluster. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So there's one thing that we may need to consider, right, when it comes to the calculation, because we need to equip our servers with storage. Storage may, add up the bill for the hardware. And then, we need to know exactly how much storage we need, and that calculates the price. But there is a performance implication on this, right? So dual parity, if you look down at the bottom, you see that you have a better efficiency of the hardware that you buy, right? With 4 servers, you get 50% efficiency, and with 16 servers, you get even up to 80% efficiency of every byte that you put on that you have available in your servers. However, dual parity, I would not recommend to do this for virtualized workloads, right? I mean, it
It
says that it
seems
is.
to be supported. It's
Yeah,
not
so
supported
virtualized,
for other workloads, but
right? Yeah,
yeah,
but the problems are not the reads. The problem are the random writes, because dual parity calculation costs CPU cycles. It also, would put stress on your CPU. And from my personal experience with projects, right, it is a lot what it puts on top of it,
yeah.
right?
I would either not do it,
Yeah,
and then we have other possibilities to save space. So
right,
the catastrophic scenario would be dual parity
right.
with ReFS deduplication and
Oh,
compression with HDDs involved. So
okay,
if
yeah,
you need no performance at all, that's the way to go. Yeah,
right.
but otherwise, don't
Yeah,
do dual
yeah.
parity. If you want to get more out of your storage, the mirror accelerated parity is much better.
Mhm.
I think the blue speed bars here are not really.
Yeah,
No, it's not that way. The dual
yeah,
parity is much maybe a slight small blue line there, not a bar. Yeah.
yeah.
So don't do
So
dual parity.
So we see mirroring, right, for the highest performance, or what you said, mirror accelerated parity, where the system sort of puts the stuff that requires higher performance into the mirror piece. And the other stuff, maybe, you are also running backups or store large amounts of videos, right, for example, which are only required for reading. That would be, go into the parity part and be perfectly fine there, right? So
Yeah.
and there is a slider that you can, move around for the type, how you want to do the sizing. Do you want to go 100% for mirror, or, to a certain portion where you say, hey, let's take the slider a little bit to the left hand side and maybe get a little bit more efficiency out of my storage system when it comes to the number of disks, right?
Yeah.
So, that's sort of a little bit of the calculation or tools that you can use for getting an idea on, what is the efficiency. If I have so many nodes, does this work out on my system? Okay. However, you mentioned it already. We do
Mhm.
have ReFS plus dedupe and compression now in version 2. And it is, well, if you think about it, it's logical to use it in a VDI scenario, right, where you have dozens or maybe, desktops that are cloned from a single image, right? So
Mhm.
the chances of cost savings are pretty high. right? But as this is, let's put it like this: there was a version 1, and now there's a version 2 for good reasons. Um, yeah, you are smiling.
Let me add something here. Let me add something here. So we both had not, I think, not the best experience with version 1. So there were many problems involved with that. And I'm very happy that Microsoft decided to do a version 2, so build it up from the ground up. However, the experience with ReFS and ReFS deduplication compression is not so huge yet. So it
Mm,
started in 23 H2 and will also be available in the Windows Server, the upcoming Windows Server 2025. And it looks promising. And of course, the savings are always promising. But if you use something like deduplication and compression, you also have to be aware, even if it works perfectly, if you ever have a problem with a volume, and
mm,
the volume, the cluster shared volume is maybe 10 terabytes in size, but you have 20 terabytes of data in it because
mm,
you have a savings of 60%. You want to use it.
mm,
You not only want to compress it, you want to put more data in the volume. Why otherwise compress and dedupe? If you have to restore this stuff, the deduplication and compression is not an inline deduplication and compression, it's a timed deduplication and
yeah,
compression. So if you have to store 20 gigabytes of data in a 10 terabyte volume, you can only do it in parts. So restore maybe 9 terabytes and then deduplicate and compress it, and then you get more space in the volume. You can restore another part. So um, think of those things before you do it. The savings are nice, and I'm pretty sure it works well. Yeah,
mhm.
but also the handling. You have to think about the handling.
So
So
I would say,
if you have to use it, do it.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
but
consider.
then don't do a huge parity part
Yeah,
also
yeah,
in your mirror accelerated parity. It's not getting faster.
right.
Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you are the admin and in the decision making process, probably you can need to, you go for mirroring or and omit dedupe and compression. If you are on the cost side of things, then there is an option, but be careful with what you're designing. Do some
Yeah.
testing. But I would
Yeah.
say, hey, that would deserve another session, right? Or
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
another video, but not here
Another
in order
video
to.
series maybe.
Yeah, let's see. Okay, but it is an interesting topic. So
Yeah.
um, what about the other stuff and the other sizing like CPU, memory, and networking? And there is a sizer tool out there that that gives you the opportunity to pre-select some hardware and also shape a little bit the workload and gives you some sort of a sample, some sample setup, right? Where you end up in, that is some OEM that is there, but there are also others, so you could choose for different hardware vendors. And it's like a rule of thumb. It's not, don't take it written in stone, right? Use your brains and calculate it through, but it's a good starting point, I would say. Okay, so you find that sizing tool on our web page, right? So what you could do there is, you go to that page, you create a project, and then you start to define your solution. Do you want to go for an integrated system, which is uh, um, well tested hardware setup, where every component, storage, network has been put together and tested as a whole? Or are you, sort of a little bit more brave and want to do other
More freedom.
systems, right? Have more freedom of choice, but also
Yeah.
with freedom of choice, you need to know a little bit more in
Yeah.
order to get to a valid system. And then if you have, chosen your system, your CPU family, you then design your workload and get up to a number. Quite interesting. I think as well, it is a starting point Don't take it written in stone, but it is something good to start with.
Yeah.
Okay, next thing would be, however, one other thing is you need probably to know a little bit of your IOPS, or what if you're trying to replace something like a VDI farm you already have because of a hardware renewal. Make sure that you at least know your numbers and maybe also the IOPS requirements. What you're trying to achieve. Right? Test before you buy. There are sometimes it's difficult if you don't have spare hardware, probably, right? I mean, you can simulate Azure Stack HCI in a virtualized environment using older hardware, or you ask your OEMs for a test kit, or maybe they have a demo center where you can try that out, or you bring partners into this, like Carsten, or you engage FastTrack. We won't provide you with the hardware, but at least if you are in the sizing process, we can sort of share our knowledges with you and do some sort of sanity checking here. Okay.
Yeah. Good advice.
Okay. You may have seen this slide before, right? Where we did the calculation assumption of how many, what would be the cost of users if we don't have a 24/7, or some sort of a reduced kind of setup where we provide 24/7 with a restricted amount of nodes, and then serve most of or turn on most of the desktops on the work hours. However, we did miss the hardware costs, right? So I would say, you would need to add the hardware costs, the CapEx costs for the Azure Stack HCI hardware once you have designed the system, and put it also, or maybe put it into the calculation for user per month. Carsten, I mean, you do have hardware, or you deal with hardware much more often than I do. So
and
what is
I even bought hardware.
no?
So I can give you some examples of ranges where the prices are. For example, the systems that we use with half a terabyte of memory, with 16 cores, they don't have the most cores in them.
Yep.
With I think we have 1.6 terabyte NVMEs. That's also not the most of the space, but we can use ReFS deduplication and so on. They cost roughly, I think I have them for 3 years now. They cost roughly 3 years ago around a bit over 12,000 euros for one server. Yeah, so that as an estimate, you can easily invest between 15 and
Right.
50,000 euro for a server. But that's of course influenced by your hardware requirements. Imagine a machine with 3 terabyte of RAM, with 128 cores, with 200 terabytes of NVMEs, you get it, right? So it depends on your needs, but then we are not hosting 160 users. We have an environment maybe for 500,000, 3,000 users, depending on what they do. So you can start low. It's not always that you have to pay 100,000 for the solution. You can start low, and even Bernhard, you have some nice Lenovo boxes that also can have GPUs in it, at least one. So I think with the Lenovo boxes you have, there are around, I think, even below 10,000 euros a pop. You can even also host maybe 40 users or so. So it doesn't have to be absolutely high, but we can't really give you a price per core that you can calculate with. Yeah, there is a range, and it also depends on the vendor you choose, what support you want. Many people, for them, it's enough if you have 3 days, not 3 days, next day business repair maybe, or someone 4 hours or 6 hours to repair 24/7. So that also influence the price a lot, right? Just to give you an estimate. But the systems we are using here, the cluster is maybe around 25,000 euros.
And I
Who
can
knows?
only repeat myself, right? So if you're uncertain, I mean, do these exercises. And if you're still uncertain, which is perfectly fine, right? I mean, it is some experience that is required. Get this experience from your OEM or from a partner or from FastTrack. Right. Okay. I think that's it for this one. We are here over half an hour now for this one. So I think in the next video, what are we talking? We are talking about the AVD prerequisites, right? So this one is going to be a little bit more interactive than with the portal, and we're looking in
Yeah.
some stuff.
Okay. So see you on the next one.